Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the People of the Peninsula Podcast. Today we have Barbara Stark-Nemon, the author of award-winning novels Even in Darkness and Hard Cider. Her third book and historical novel, Isabela's Way, arrived in September 2025. Barbara lives in Ann Arbor in Northport, Michigan. She has degrees in English literature, art history, and speech-language pathology from the University of Michigan and worked with deaf and language disabled children. Even in Darkness is a historical fiction based on a family story in 20th century Germany. Hard Cider is contemporary fiction set in northern Michigan, and her fall 2025 novel is a 17th century European coming-of-age refugee story. Enjoy. Your most recent book this fall, Isabela's Way, tell us about that.
Isabela's Way is the story of a 14-year-old embroideress who believes that she is a devout Catholic. She's been raised that way. Her father is traveling to Hamburg, Germany and she doesn't understand this, to establish a new life for the family because the Spanish Inquisition has seriously begun to affect the life of what are known as Conversos, or Jewish families who've converted to Catholicism, but the Inquisition persecutes them anyway, believing that they didn't really convert, that they aren't really serious Catholics. Isabela knows none of this. She believes she's a good Catholic girl. Her mother dies in the plague while the father's gone, and she has to carry on the family textile and embroidery business. She's very skilled and talented, and she's obviously upset and grieving for the loss of her mother and the absence of her father when a mysterious woman comes and says, "I've got a message from your father. You have to leave." She does not understand until way farther into the book that her family actually were originally Jewish and that they did convert. She's been protected from that information for fear that if she is brought before the Inquisition, that she won't be able to tell the truth, which her truth is that no, I'm Catholic. Um, so she begins a journey with a lot of interesting allies and a special young man. She begins a journey across Portugal, Spain, into France, and eventually into Germany, and has quite a number of adventures. She's being pursued by a priest who is bound and determined to persecute as many conversos as he can. And so she's being pursued, but she's also got allies. And this is kind of her coming of age story. It's also the story of refugees from the Iberian Peninsula who had to find safe places to go to. Um, it's a story of embroidery and symbolism and how many women in history used embroidery, used fiber arts to signal danger, to signal safety, to signal romance, all different kinds of things. So there's a lot of fiber arts, there's a lot of adventure, there's a lot of danger, a little romance, and that's the basic story of Isabela's Way. And I came to that story. My other two books are based loosely on, or not so loosely, on family stories, and either my experience or members of my family's experiences. But Isabela just dropped into my head, fully formed, on a bicycle trip from Lisbon, Portugal to the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. She just came fully formed into my head. And that time I was still writing Even in Darkness. I knew I was going to be writing Hard Cider. So I told her, "You've got to wait. I can't do you right now. There's too much else happening in my life." And she did wait. So she waited a long time. I started writing her right around when Hard Cider, which takes place not just on Leelanau Peninsula, but in Northport, Michigan. And I started writing it when Hard Cider came out in 2018, and it took a long time for me to finish the book because of the pandemic. and I couldn't travel as often as I wanted to do research, which is very important to me. Um, but I finished it, and then it took another year to get it into publication. So here we are. It's out.
Yeah, yeah, and you released that in September, correct?
Yes.
So you got this idea. When were you in Portugal? You know how, and what was just kind of that experience like on that bike ride?
So it was kind of a fraught experience. That was way back in 2011. My husband and I were supposed to do this bicycle trip, and we were going to end up visiting our son who was studying his junior year abroad in Madrid. And my husband got a rare and dangerous skin cancer that required 4 surgeries. And the only way you could get rid of it was by surgery. There were no other treatments. And they successfully got clean margins, but he had a crater in his shoulder and could not do the bike trip. But he said, "You've got to go because you've got to go see our son, Nathan." And so it was kind of a warrior woman bike trip for me. It was, I'd been through some traumatic stuff, and I really wanted to see my son, and I didn't want to leave my husband, but he was okay. Like he was safe. Um, and so the fact that this girl came, jumped into my head was a really unexpected experience. And it was very meaningful to me because, like I said, my other books were known quantities. This was an unknown quantity and required me to make up the entire story. There was no scaffold of something else that I knew. So I had to research everything. And um, the bike trip was fabulous, but it was challenging. And so I felt like I was on this warrior woman um, bike trip, and this girl became kind of a little warrior woman, young woman to me. So I think a lot of things happened and coalesced to make a very clear image of who Isabella was and what needed to happen. But then, of course, there were the years of research, and I returned to Europe twice more, and had some wonderful experiences with friends who live there and friends who live here that traveled there. And my husband was able to come on the following 2 trips. Um, and that's really important to me. I really need a sense of the tastes, the smells, the um, visuals of the places that I write about. That was one of, Forward Reviews did a review of hard cider, which takes place in Northport. And one of the things they pointed out was that I really captured that landscape, which is important to me because where and how my books are set is almost like a character in the book. And so I was very happy to have that recognized. And I felt the same way about Isabella. I traced the path of all of my characters, 3 different pathways until the book ends. I traced it myself so that I could really see these places and write about them from having been there, even though we're talking about 400 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I mean, does this, obviously that era must inspire you in some ways, correct?
It, I wasn't, what I do know, I mean, the one personal connection is that I know that my maternal grandmother's family did make the journey. They were Jewish, and they did make the journey from Portugal to Hamburg, Germany at the beginning of the 17th century. That was all I knew. So during COVID, when I couldn't travel, I did a deep dive. My great grandfather was an armchair genealogist, so I had some pretty good names to go back with, but I traced my ancestor who was born in Abrantes, Portugal, which is where my story begins, and died in Hamburg 45 years later. So I had that piece of information, but other than that, I didn't know anything. Everything else I had to learn. I had no idea how pervasive the Inquisition was. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I knew that. I knew that at the same year, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain expelled all the Jews and Muslims or forced them to convert in Spain. And many, many, many people traversed the border into Portugal, where for the next 100 years they could at least kind of hide out a little bit until there was a marriage that required condition of a marriage between a Spanish prince and a Portuguese princess, or vice versa, that they had to impose the Inquisition. So there was a second removal of non, of heretics, basically, of people who are not of the Catholic faith. And it's that second removal of people from the Iberian Peninsula that is the setting for my book. And many, many, and most of them actually went by water to the New World, to the United States, or to America. It wasn't the United States then, or to South America, to Brazil. But a lot of them went to the cities that would accept them, and that was Amsterdam, Hamburg, and Venice. There's no real evidence that there was this secret network that I created overland, but 100 years before this time, there was some evidence. And so I thought, okay, that's the joy of fiction, is you can make stuff up. I'm just gonna posit that there was this secret network and that this young girl has to embroider on their behalf, even though she doesn't understand for quite a while that that's what she's doing.
When you were going back to Europe those additional times, what aspects of the story kind of came about from those trips, or was there any nugget that you wouldn't have been able to put in there that you
Oh my
did since
goodness,
you went?
yes. Oh my goodness, yes. So one of the joys of being an author with my publisher is that I have fellow authors all over the world, one of whom lived in the Pyrenees in France. And she invited me to come and stay with her, and she showed me, she lives in early, which became a setting for my book. Never would have even known about this place without her. And she took me to Bayonne, where it turns out a lot of Conversos and others escaped to. It's on the coast. They got there by water, most of them. And the Jewish community there actually brought chocolate to the country of France. The new the new skill of learning how to make chocolate. So, and Bayonne is famous for that. I would never have known that. And then another friend of mine had visited Lyon, which was a silk center, a silk trading center in France, and she discovered these secret passageways that were built right around the time that my book takes place in order to secretly transfer silk from the workshops where it was made down to the river where it was shipped off to around the world, um, because it was a big part of the silk trade. And it they were secret, and they were really interesting ways that you would get into them. Like there'd be a stone wall and you would push one stone and the door would kind of open. It was very very almost fantasy like. I would never have known about that if I hadn't gone there. And now that you can go and as a tourist you can go and just tour through them, and they're beautiful. The engineering of them and the lighting of them is fascinating. So of course that became part of the secret escape network at a very um, critical point in the plot. I went to the Camargue, which is a marshy, gorgeous area right on the Mediterranean, southern France, where there are wild white horses that the Roma brought to the Camargue. The Roma were also persecuted by the Inquisition. So, of course, that became another part of the setting, and part of the plot. So, yeah, there were many, many places that I visited that I wouldn't have known about them. And I couldn't, if I'd just done book research, I wouldn't have had the sense of how to really create those environments if I hadn't gone there. There was a workshop in Lyon that actually uses looms from the 17th and 18th century to weave silk. And I was able to visit there and look at them and watch them do it. Excuse me. So that was, yeah, there were many, many instances of being there and having that enliven my writing and really inform the plot as well.
This was a new kind of style of writing for you. It sounds like, correct?
Yeah, well, what was new is that I had to make it all up.
Right.
In even in darkness, 85% of what happens in that book really did happen. My job was just to write it, and the other 15% I made up. In hard cider, I call that a what if book. What if things had worked out in my life had worked out very differently than they did? What would that have looked like? So it was kind of a what if story, but it had a lot of basis in my own life. This was a completely made up story, made up characters. Um, and so that was a real new challenge for me as a novelist.
Yeah, and could you, while you mentioned the first two books, could you kind of give us a synopsis of those two first books, Even in Darkness and Hard Cider?
So even in darkness, it's kind of a story of my heart. It's based on the life of my great aunt, my grandfather's sister, who's the only member of that family who did not escape Nazi Germany. She wouldn't leave because her husband was ill, and if you were ill, you couldn't get um, a visa to get out of the country, or no one would give you an affidavit to take care of you in this country. And her mother, my great grandmother, just said, I'm too old. I can't leave. No, I'm not leaving. So she wouldn't leave her mother or her husband. And she stayed and she was in a concentration camp. She kept everybody alive because she was a massage therapist to the commandant. This is really true. And when she was finally liberated, she lost everybody she fought to save and then went on to live the rest of her 100 years in Germany with a Catholic priest half her age in the most transcendent and beautiful relationship I've ever witnessed. And I got to know and love those people, met them many times. And I thought, this is a story like I've never heard before. I need to write this. So that's that book. And I did write it. Um, and it's I love it because all my books are about people who are confronted by experiences that are unasked for and often very unwelcome. And then what do you do about that? Do you succumb to it, or do you find some resilience? Do you recognize who your allies are and recruit some strength from those around you and your own inner self, or do you succumb and be miserable? So all my books sort of have that going on in them. And she was kind of the gold standard for me, for my own life too, in terms of just, I admired her. Um, and she was very close to her brother, my grandfather, and I was very close to him. So I knew this story, was raised in it. So that was that story. And then Hard Cider, um, like I said, it's a what if book. It deals with issues of infertility, of how we form families, of getting to, being a woman of a certain age who gets to a certain point in life. And do you chase your dreams anymore, or do you give up? And my character says, no, my dream is to make hard apple cider in Northport, Michigan, and I'm going to make that happen. She's had a successful career. She's raised her family, but nobody thinks that this is a great idea except for her. And then she has a shocking secret that comes to her that really redefines who she thought her family really was, and she has to deal with that, which she does. Um, so that's hard cider. And people who read hard cider will recognize many businesses and many landscapes on the Leelanau, northern part of the Leelanau Peninsula.
Is there is there a fourth book in mind right now that you can kind of tell us
You
in it?
know, I do. This is the first time in 25 years that I haven't had a book sort of, knocking on my skull saying, let me out. I do have two projects that are smaller projects. I don't think they're going to be books, but I kept them on the back burner. One arises out of a family member's stories of her personal cookbook, and I want to write those stories and put them together with her recipes, because much of the cooking I do and that of my sisters do are her recipes. And then I have a trove of letters. Even in Darkness was informed by 100 letters that I translated from my mother's cousin to his mother, which my great aunt. And I've got another trove of family letters that I don't know where those are going, but I aim to find out. So I'm going to be working with those two projects. But right now I'm in the middle of a book tour, and there's only so much. It's funny. I can't, I'm not a person who can write and market and be out in the world at the same time. So I'm letting, I'm letting this book tour um, have its time and get Isabela out there. And then we'll see what happens with these other two projects.
Yeah, and where you at with the book tour? Where you off next, or what's been going on?
Well, I just found out today that I've been accepted into the Tucson Book Festival. So I'll be going there in March. I've been on the East Coast in New Jersey. I was in the Boston Book Festival. I did two events in Connecticut and New York. I'm doing an event in Cleveland. I've got another event, and a ton of, I love doing libraries and book groups. So I've got a lot of book groups and book clubs that are, asking me to come and join them, and I love doing that. So um, that's what I'm doing. And I've got an event coming in Chicago. Probably, I'm trying to put, my son lives in LA. I'm trying to get out there. So I basically try and do book events where I have people that I want to visit.
What?
And next summer, I will be at the Leelanau Township Library and Willowbrook. Um, and it's a joint venture with the library in Willowbrook and Dog Ear Books in Northport. So that is coming next summer. And I
Yeah,
was just at Leelanau Uncaged. I had a booth with another author friend of mine, and that was wonderful. I love doing Leelanau Uncaged.
yeah, that's a terrific event, and that's great. We can't wait to hear about the events next summer. And I just wanted for a few minutes talk about more about your background here. Where are you originally from, Barbara?
Grew up in Huntington Woods, Michigan, and I came to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, to go to undergrad school, and basically never left. I went to undergrad school. I worked as a English teacher for a couple of years. Then I went back to graduate school and became a speech and language pathologist. Then I went and lived in England for a year and worked at the American Community School there as a speech pathologist and English as a second language teacher. Um, Came back here and became a speech pathologist working with deaf and language disabled kids for the rest of the 30 years that I did that. I also worked at St. Joseph's Mercy Hospital here in Ann Arbor, setting up a children's program. Um, and It's interesting. People ask me, well, how did you end up writing books? With that background. I mean, I was an English and art history major, but there's a through line. My grandfather was a master storyteller. He really encouraged the grandchildren to tell him stories about our lives, and he was gentle and easygoing with his comments, encouraging. We got a better dessert if we told him a good story. Um, and then I was a really avid reader. Um, and my undergrad degree, as I said, was in English literature and art history. I started teaching English, but there were those kids that went through my class every year that I didn't know what to do for them. They were smart enough, but they had a glitch. And I didn't know what that glitch was. This was in the early days of learning about learning disability. So I went back to graduate school, and it turned out the person that said, "Oh, I know what you need to learn," was in the speech pathology department. She taught child language development, and that became sort of my passion. And I became a speech pathologist working primarily with language development issues. My first job happened to be with kids who were deaf, so I ended up learning sign language. So that was another huge new area for me to learn about. But that the through line is storytelling, grandfather storytelling, being a big reader, and then finding out that I was pretty good at helping kids who had a hard time telling stories, either in written language or spoken language or in sign language, helping them figure out how to communicate. And that then all of a sudden I realized I really want to write a novel. So when I retired, that's what I started doing.
Wow, that's an interesting journey you've been
It
on,
was,
Barbara. And
it's been wonderful. Most people aren't lucky enough to even have a first career that really fills them up and makes them happy other than just earning a living. And I've been really, really, really lucky to have two careers like that. So I'm a grateful person.
that is awesome, Barbara. And where can someone find your books at?
My books are published by She Writes Press and distributed by Simon and Schuster. And any bookstore can order my books if they don't have them on the shelf. They're of course available on Amazon. They're available um, pretty much anywhere books are sold. Um, and uh, I've learned, because I spelled Isabella the Portuguese way with one L. Sometimes people have a hard time finding it if they're using two L's in Isabella. So there's only one L. Um, but for those of you folks in Leelanau County, go to Dog Ear Books in Northport, go to the independent bookstores in Traverse City, in Sutton's Bay, in Leland, in Glen Arbor. Any one of those places will be happy to get a copy of any of my books for you. And if you have trouble, give me an email. You can find out more about me at www.barbarastarknemon.com. And that's Barbara and then Starknemon. It's a weird spelling of Neiman. Um, and at that website, you can also learn more about the books that I've written, and I've got a blog there, tells you what I'm thinking about, also lets you know where I'll be and where you can come and see me. And I love doing book clubs. So if anybody has a book club they want to invite me to by Zoom, or if I'm happen to be up there in person, I'd be delighted.
Yeah, that's awesome, Barbara. And well, just thank you for your time coming on the show, and we just appreciate you, and we wish you the best of luck with the rest of your book tour, and um, we just appreciate you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Brian, for having me. I really appreciate it also.